6,000. The average person has approximately 6,000 thoughts a day. Well, easy math will tell me that's 180,000 thoughts a month and over 2 million thoughts a year. Well, shucks. What happens if 10% of those thoughts are based on half-truths? Or if 10% of those thoughts are based on falsehoods? What happens if 10% of those thoughts are based on flat-out lies? Well, that's where blind spots come into play. The formative years, ages 6 through 10, that's what they tell us, right, is really where we bake our cake, right, where we are really learning how to receive and respond to life. The only problem with ages 6 to 10 is you're 6 to 10. You don't know much. And so being raised by imperfect people and being raised in an imperfect world and being ages 6 to 10, do you think that the way we learn to receive and process and respond to life might be a little off? No doubt about it. And so what happens is as we continue to run through life, those coping skills that we learned, yes, they can be improved upon, no doubt about it. And most people do to a large degree, because if we didn't, we wouldn't play well with each other, right? We are able to mature and navigate life, refining and repackaging those coping skills. And so we can have those social graces. We can get a job and go to work, and we can interact with society around us. Because one thing's for sure, if we're not responding to life well, people are going to let you know, right? Whether verbally or they might just cut you off. But be that as it may, if we have 6,000 thoughts a day, 180,000 thoughts a month, and over 2 million a year, we're imperfect people and we're raised in an imperfect world. Well, what happens when some of those thoughts that we have just aren't true thoughts? That's how blind spots are created over time. We all have this running narrative in our head, right? That still small inner voice that we have. And what happens is those thoughts over time, they become stories. And those stories become our life, right? We very much live into the words that we think and we speak. My father, God rest his soul, for years he talked about how he had to beat dad. His dad passed away shortly after turning 69. My pops, as I called him, he moved on 30 days after turning 70. Well, words are important, right? And those words are the result of our thoughts, and those thoughts become our stories. And if you think about how many thoughts that we're having, don't you think it's important that we think about what we're thinking? No doubt about it. And so how I like to view blind spots is that blind spots are forced, in my opinion, in that we're all walking in a forest to one degree or another. Now, don't mishear me. There is absolutely no doubt. Many seasons in our lives and many aspects of our lives, we are out in the prairie, we're out in the fields, we're having real moments of revelation and enlightenment and breakthrough. There's no doubt about it. But it's impossible for us to know everything, and it's impossible for us to respond on point 100% of the time. And it's impossible for us to always make the right call. And so we're all, to one degree or another, in certain areas of our lives, walking in a forest. And if you go back to those sheer number of thoughts that we have, neuroscience, and I'm no scientist, but reading a few articles, right, it is proven that thoughts literally create grooves in our brains over time. And the more like thoughts, the more that we have the same thought or similar thoughts, the deeper and deeper and more pronounced those grooves in our brain become. Well, like I said, if let's just take a decade worth of time. Let's just take it from when I was 20 to 30. Well, doing that math, right, that's over 20 million thoughts. And if that decade, which had some highs and some lows, to say the least, if I had 10% of my thoughts that were untrue or falsehoods or just flat out lies, well, that's a few million thoughts that are no doubt having an impact on my story that I'm telling myself, and then how that translates into my behavior, right? And so I was absolutely walking in a forest based upon those thoughts that were half truths, falsehoods, or even flat out lies. And what happens is just like any forest, right? You're going to walk through a forest down the paths that are well worn, that are the beaten paths through that forest, right? We all like to follow the path of least resistance. Well, our negative thoughts are no different. And what happens is that over time, we just become more and more accustomed to walking down those grooves in our brain that those, in this particular case that I want to focus on, those negative thoughts have created. And the deeper we go and the deeper we wind through the forest, the more and more pronounced those blind spots become. And so that is why it's so easy to see sometimes in someone who's been struggling, or someone who just keeps banging their head against that proverbial wall while we on the outside are going, hey, can't you see what you're doing? Those grooves in his or her brain are just too deep. You just can't break free. And what those thoughts do over time is they just throw an anchor out. They just throw an anchor out in your past. And it just keeps you tethered to that past and that old thought pattern, never allowing you to break free and truly enter in to your next season. And so what do we do with that? How do we break ourselves from those thought patterns so we can then truly usher in a new season of our lives? Well, as we're walking in that forest, the first thing we need to do is stop walking. That's tough, right? When we're walking down that path of negative thoughts, the first thing we need to do is simply stop walking. What does that mean? That means there needs to be a recognition that these thoughts that you have are not producing any fruit. I had a man years ago who was critical in my transformative walk. One time he told me, reality is a lot kinder than our thoughts. And he unpacked it for me. If there was a traumatic event that is associated with that anchor that we throw back in our past, if there's a traumatic event that happened 10, 12, 15 years ago, the reality is that event happened one time. But for example, for me, from 20 to 30, over those 10 years, how many times did I think about that event? And neuroscience tells us that as we think about that event and relive that event, all those emotions and all of those thoughts associated with that event, they just keep coming back. So the reality is that I relived that event, in this particular case, hundreds of thousands of times, when in reality, the event happened one time. And so, no, I'm not saying this is easy, but it is simple. So the first thing we need to do is we just need to stop walking down that well-beaten, worn path of negative thoughts. We just need to stop walking and say, hey, this isn't working. A recognition, an acceptance, and admittance that it is not working, and identifying that thought, those thoughts, that thought pattern that just has us winding down a useless path in our story, in our particular blind spot, in our forest of blind spots in this particular realm. So that's the first thing we need to do. We need to stop walking. Second thing we need to do, we need to do a 180. We just simply need to turn about. We need to make a decision to say, I'm not going to have those thoughts. We need to make a decision to say, I'm going to start doing things differently this time. We're going to make a decision to come up with a set of actions to counteract those thoughts when they come around. In that vein, it's the same reason, it's what we need to counteract, for example, when we go to the gym in January and we see that it's packed, and it's really packed kind of up until February, Valentine's Day, because everyone's want to look good for Valentine's Day, right? But by the time March comes around or April Fool's comes around, gyms are empty again. Why? Because of all the people I've had the blessing to interact with over my life, I've broken more promises with me easily, far more than anyone else, right? Because there wasn't a conviction. There wasn't a soul shift that went along with what my brain was calling for and what my body needed, right? It was just my brain screaming for one thing and my body wanting to do something else. But I didn't have that soul shift. I didn't have that shift in my gut that actually put some meat to the bone on my decision. So we need to stop walking. We need to turn around, and then we need to start walking out. And it is in this walking out where transformation unfolds. It is in this walking out of the forest where we align our thoughts and our actions, right? It is that confluence of our thoughts and actions over time. That is how character is developed. That is how character unfolds. That is how transformation happens. And depending on how long you've had those thoughts and depending on how deep those grooves are in your brain, well, that's going to influence how long and how hard you're going to have to work at walking back out of that forest. Right, and this is where discipline comes into play. The daily discipline into recognizing the thoughts, calling out those thoughts, refusing to allow those thoughts to travel down that path, and counteracting those thoughts with both new thoughts and new actions. We need to align our thoughts and our actions over time to allow the transformation to unfold in our lives. And so what happens is with this discipline, is that it's the discipline of understanding that transformation unfolds 1 degree at a time. If you go to my website, soulshift.org, you will see what my signature course is called, the 1 degree. And it's called the 1 degree because whether you need to make a major life transformation or you just need to do the daily refinement, it happens 1 degree at a time. If I was going to walk from here, and I'm blessed to be in sunny San Diego, if I was asked to walk from here to LA, roughly 100 miles, and I was 1 degree off with each step, by the time I got to LA and 100 miles, I'd either be in the ocean or in the desert. Now, if I'm just walking down the street a mile to the 7-Eleven, I'm not going to be that far off. That's where the 1 degree comes into play. If you need that deep internal transformation, well, then your 1 degree is 1 degree shift each day into a brand new direction. As my father lovingly told me back in the day, man, you are max velocity, no direction, son. So he gave me the credit for the max velocity, but there was no direction. That's where the 1 degree comes into play. Or maybe you all are in a season right now where you don't need the major life shift of 1 degree at a time. You just need that constant refinement, right? If you're married, that's marriage, where you need to say, okay, I need to surrender there. Okay, I need to draw a healthful boundary there. That constant refinement of 1 degree left and right to keep you on track. 6,000 thoughts a day, 180,000 thoughts a month, and over 2 million a year. Thoughts become actions, and our thoughts and actions become our story that we tell ourselves that manifest in our lives. Are your thoughts true? Are they healthy? What type of story are your thoughts creating? We need to create a story that we want to live into. We need to create a story where our thoughts are true, they're healthful, that they encourage our actions to align with our thoughts. And then what we need to do is we need to align those thoughts and actions over time as we encompass them with our connection to the eternal. What is that thing that gives you pause? That thing that settles you and centers you? Is it beauty? Is it the innocence of a newborn baby? Is it a sunrise? Is it a sunset? Is it forgiveness? What is it? Well, whatever that is, I suggest to you that that is your eternal. Some of us call it God. Some of us call it a higher power. Some of us call it a universal energy. Whatever it is, that's what you need to allow your thoughts to be centered and focused on and fixed upon. It is also then that eternal that allows you to tap into for energy as you walk back out of the forest of blindness, exiting one day into breakthrough. Stop walking, turn around, and start walking out. And as you start walking out, you tap into that eternal, that one thing that gives you pause, that connection with the eternal that says, yes, there is something bigger than me. Yes, I do want to participate in this thing called life. And yes, I want to create a story worth living into. If you've enjoyed this content, please go like and subscribe. Give me a thumbs up at soulshift.org. And I look forward to working with you and walking with you as we both, all of us, march down this life of transformation as we seek and attain breakthrough from blind spots so we can all have that radical harvest on the other side of discipline. Thank you for listening.